Shura, witches, and welcome back to Myst-ical. Today we're going to be returning to the cavern and talking about the follow-up to Myst, Riven. And let's just say I have some more nuanced opinions than just the lavish praise I gave Myst, so let's go ahead and link in to Riven. Riven released in 1997 by Cyan World on DVD-ROM as a highly anticipated follow-up to the sudden classic that was Myst. The developers said they wanted to make something that was distinct from Myst visually while still continuing the atmosphere of the previous game. This also follows the Miller brothers having expanded the Myst franchise into what was about to be a full trilogy of books, but we'll dive into those a little bit later. But in any case, Myst's lore had been thoroughly fleshed out by the time of Riven, with a whole new world following the Dunny. It's also with Riven that the truly cinematic trend of openings of the next few games in the franchise was kicked off. The game opens with the player back in the location of the true ending of Myst, talking to Atris about a plan to rescue his wife, Catherine. He tells you about a man named Gin and how the age that Gin and Catherine are stuck on is collapsing, asking you to rescue Catherine while Atris stays behind and keeps the age stable long enough for the both of you to get out. Don't worry, there isn't actually a time limit on this game, but that would be a cool addition for a remaster. Once you arrive on Riven, things are very different from your arrival on Myst. Where Myst started off very open-ended, dropping you on an island to explore, Riven drops you in a prison cage, followed by another few minutes of cutscenes. One of the books that Atris gave you to try and stop Gin is promptly stolen, and the man who steals it is then knocked out and dragged away, and you are finally released to explore the Age of Riven. And this is a pretty wild opening. It's intense and intriguing, and it's definitely a big hook compared to the just figure it out kind of opening of Myst. Of course, this is also a little bit slowed down by the fact that you now have access to the 20-page journal Atris gave you on notes about what's going on in Riven. Spoiler alert, this is the entire plot of Act 3 of Book of Atris, and it goes over some of the context of what's going on. None of it is actually necessary to solving the game, which is kind of a downside of a lot of these journals where they'll just have one puzzle solution hidden somewhere in them, but it is really interesting to give context to what's going on and why Gin is a serious threat. But you are now free to your own devices to go and explore the Ages of Riven, very much like the opening of Myst. But as you start to explore Riven, two things become very quickly apparent. One, it's very obvious that the developers did their homework on developing cultures to include the layered cultures of the natives of Riven, compared to the imported culture of the Dunny that Gin brought with him. This is integrated everywhere on the island, and I would say is done really, really well. The second thing you'll notice is that Riven steers away from the main mechanic of Myst, and that's utilizing linking books and ages. While there are multiple ages throughout Riven, I wouldn't say that they're really core parts of the game like they are in Myst. They serve more as stopping points to collect a little bit of information or see a cutscene or collect a new journal, but they don't really serve a purpose of exploring and puzzle solving like they did in previous game, which is a big departure. And if you remember some of my comments on how I was a fan of that mechanic, it is rather disappointing that this very core and interesting mechanic was not utilized to the same degree. And if my tone isn't giving it away, I should just say outright that I am not the biggest fan of Riven. It is my personal belief that Riven is a bit of a black sheep in the series, because a lot of the things that Riven does, it's the only game that does it. And that isn't to say that Riven itself is a bad game. The story is a solid through line, and the story of Gin is incredibly interesting. Gin himself is one of the best written characters in the series, and the story is incredibly strong in this regard around him and his actions. However, where I feel like Myst was incredibly tight in its design, Riven has a bit of a disconnect between all its moving parts. Here's an example of what I mean. One of the major puzzles in the game is collecting a series of clues to figure out how to unlock a door. The problem is that some of the parts of each of the clues that you get aren't necessarily obvious and or aren't immediately connected. The very first clue you'll get is there are these rotating eyes around the island, and when you click on one you will get a number, and less obviously you will get a sound. The numbers are pretty obvious because when you see a strange symbol in a puzzle game, you're probably going to write it down. And this is even more enforced because fairly shortly after that, you're given a mechanic that teaches you how to translate Dunny numbers into our numbers. But that second part of the puzzle, the sounds, are less than well designed, as several of them sounded like just creaky wood, and I did not notice that there was a difference to them until I made several laps around the island in my original playthrough. Remember that whole tangent I had on Myst about how there are no subtitles and sound puzzles? Yeah, this is what happens in Riven, but 10 times worse. The end result is a puzzle that can be solved, but the pieces don't feel naturally together. This gets even worse that some puzzles aren't even fully fully explained. In particular, the dunny numbers. I talked about this in my stream. The dunny number system works in a similar way to Roman numerals in that it groups at certain numbers, but at no point in the game itself does it explain how those numbers group. And it's a shame because this could have easily been solved by connecting a couple of the moving parts with some of the blank chalkboards that are in that schoolhouse I mentioned earlier. Why not put some early arithmetic puzzles onto those chalkboards that explain how the larger numbers work for the ones that don't match the symbols and patterns of the dunny number system as you're supposed to infer it works. It also would add a lot more to the world building other than just kind of throwing things at you and expecting you to understand. And this follows basically everywhere on Riven. Lack of subtitles make it difficult to notice important sounds. Objects aren't always apparent to click on, often missing pathways or hidden levers. Puzzle solutions are shown really far away from the puzzles themselves without any association, making it hard to correlate the two. Some of these do happen to be because the game is older and hasn't seen a remaster, but even then, Myst more successfully tied in solutions to its puzzles across multiple different worlds, where Riven only has the one and failed to do so. And this is a shame because there are a lot of really interesting staples in the Myst franchise that Riven introduced. Like I said, the story is amazing, the actors all did a wonderful job, the introduction of the dunny language and people actually speaking it is fascinating, the roller coaster rides and absolute Rube Goldberg machines of transport are immensely fun to go on. The world building is fascinating and nuanced in very interesting ways. I was even surprised during my stream to find that there are randomly generated elements of these games that allow for each playthrough to be very interesting. Not to mention there are an absolute plethora of endings that you combine all the different solutions you have, which makes for a lot of really rewarding ways to play through the story. That said, Riven still feels very railroaded, and that's strange considering how many endings the game has. And this is likely because in comparison in Myst, you can beat the game in any order that you want. While there are the same 4-ish endings, it felt a lot more like you were solving the puzzles in whatever order you wanted and that the solution was your making. Riven only has the one way to get to the ending because there is just the one age and there's only one order you can solve the puzzles in. Which isn't to say that it's a bad story, but it feels like it's connected to the atmosphere and themes of Myst in name only and less so in application. And so I feel the goal to make Riven stand out from Myst resulted in a divergence from what made Myst good in the first place, and that was tight puzzles, clearly linked clues, and a wide diversity of location. And Riven just doesn't live up to those expectations. With that said, do I think that you should play Riven? Yes, I do. If nothing else, the story is well worth a playthrough, and you should really experience it for yourself before going into the rest of the story of Atreus and his family. I think Riven has a lot of really good design elements, and potentially, if Cyan ever decided to remaster a game that wasn't Myst, I think a remaster of Riven could really help contextualize and connect some of the more disparate elements of the puzzle solving and put them a little bit more cohesively into a modernized package. But with that, we've wrapped up Riven. It's time to pick up a game that Cyan Worlds did not develop and see if it holds up to the starting 2 games in the franchise. Join me next week on Monday as I start streaming Exile. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a comment and a like down below, as well as subscribe if you'd like to see more reviews on the Myst series, as well as everything else that comes out on this channel. Make sure you ring that bell. If you want to reach out and talk to me more about the Myst series, make sure you check out all the social links down in the description and get in contact. And with that, I will see you guys later. Bye!